Engines thundered down the cracked highway like a storm rolling through steel. The Ravens, a feared yet quietly respected biker brotherhood, rode in a tight formation, black leather, chrome gleaming under the mid-afternoon sun. At their front was Duke Maddox, a man whose reputation could silence a room before he even spoke. He wasn't the kind of man who went looking for trouble anymore, not since the war, not since his brother's death. But trouble, it seemed, still had a way of finding him. The Ravens slowed as they rolled into Brooklyn Falls, a small, forgotten town clinging to the edges of industry. Broken sidewalks, boarded shops, and too many eyes that looked away too fast. They stopped outside a dusty convenience store for gas and cold drinks. The kind of stop that usually passed without notice, until Duke heard shouting. Across the street, 2 officers were pinning someone against a patrol car. A girl, barely 16, her brown skin glinting in the harsh sunlight. Her wrists were cuffed tight, her cheek pressed against the metal. Her voice cracked as she tried to explain something the officers didn't seem to want to hear. "She said she didn't do anything," muttered Tank, Duke's right-hand man. "But they're not listening." Duke's jaw tightened. He'd seen this before. Power used like a weapon, the strong crushing the small. Memories flashed, his brother years ago, thrown against a wall by men who swore they served justice. He still remembered the sound it made. "Stay here," Duke said quietly. He walked across the street, boots heavy against the pavement. The officers turned as his shadow fell over them. "Something wrong, gentlemen?" he asked, voice calm but carrying the kind of authority that made even grown men second-guess their next word. "Move along, sir," one officer barked. "Police business." "Doesn't look like business," Duke said. "Looks like bullying." The younger cop's hand went to his holster, a twitch of fear disguised as control. Duke didn't flinch. He just looked at the girl. Her eyes were wide, terrified but defiant. "There was blood on her lip. What's her crime?" he asked. "Shoplifting," the older cop said. "Caught red-handed." Duke glanced toward the store window. A clerk stood inside, shaking his head slowly, like he didn't believe the story either. "Funny," Duke said, eyes narrowing. "Doesn't look like a thief to me. Looks like a kid." The tension hung in the air, heavy as thunder before a storm. And in that moment, before anyone spoke again, Duke Maddox decided that if justice wouldn't protect her, then he damn sure would. The air felt heavy, like the town itself was holding its breath. The wind kicked up dust along the cracked pavement as Duke Maddox stood between the girl and the 2 officers. His presence was quiet but commanding, the kind that didn't need noise to be heard. "Sir, I said move along," the younger cop repeated, voice sharper now. "This doesn't concern you." Duke's eyes stayed on the girl. Her lip trembled, her wrists raw against the cuffs. He saw the bruises that didn't come from one afternoon. They were older, layered like history. "Kid," he said softly. "What's your name?" She hesitated, her eyes darting between him and the officers. "Jada," she whispered. The older cop yanked her arm. "Don't answer him. That was it." Duke took a slow step forward, his tone calm but edged with steel. "You might want to ease off her arm, officer." "You're cutting her circulation." The younger cop took a step toward Duke, puffing himself up. "You interfering with an arrest?" "I'm interfering with a mistake," Duke said, voice even. Tank and the other Ravens were watching from across the street now, still as statues. One by one, more townspeople began peeking from doorways and windows, drawn by the sight of the biker standing toe-to-toe with the badge. The older cop tried to reassert control, his voice rising. "This girl's a thief. The store clerk caught her walking out with a candy bar she didn't pay for." Duke looked at the clerk. The man behind the glass looked uneasy, shaking his head again, then stepped outside. "She didn't steal anything," he said nervously. "She dropped the money, I saw it. I told them, but," the officer snapped, "stay out of this." But it was too late. The truth had already begun to unravel. Duke's gaze hardened. "You hear that?" he said quietly. "You're choking a kid over $1 worth of candy." The younger cop's hand twitched near his belt. Duke didn't move, didn't blink. His calm was scarier than any shout could have been. "Take the cuffs off," he said. "You don't give orders here." "Then you're about to have a problem," Duke replied. Behind him, a dozen engines roared to life as the Ravens started their bikes. The sound was deep, growling, powerful, the sound of unity. The crowd grew thicker. Eyes were watching now, recording, whispering, and suddenly the officers didn't look as sure of themselves. "Fine," the older one muttered. "We'll sort this at the station." He reached for Jada's arm, but Duke stepped between them. "No," he said. "You'll sort it here." Because Duke knew, once they took her away, she might not come back the same. And he'd already seen too many kids disappear behind locked doors of justice. The air around them felt charged, like a fuse had been lit and everyone was waiting for the spark. The two officers stood tense, hands hovering near their belts, eyes darting between Duke and the growing line of bikers rumbling across the street. The townspeople whispered now, phones raised, recording. The story was no longer just a moment, it was becoming proof. Jada stood frozen, her breath shallow. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. A stranger, a biker no less, standing up for her when everyone else just watched. Duke took a slow breath, the kind that steadied years of anger. He'd promised himself long ago he wouldn't lose control again. Not after that night in Detroit, the night the cops dragged his brother away for something he didn't do. The night they found his brother's body 2 days later. Suicide, they'd said. Duke never believed it. That memory wasn't a scar. It was an open wound that never healed. He looked at the officer holding Jada's arm and said quietly, "You know what the difference is between law and justice?" The younger cop blinked.
"Excuse me?"
"Law tells you what you can do," Duke said. "Justice tells you what you shouldn't." The older officer stepped forward, trying to regain control. "Sir, I'm warning you. Step back now, or you'll what?" Duke's tone didn't rise, but it cut through the air like a blade. "Rough up another kid to prove you can?" A murmur spread through the crowd. One of the officers shifted uncomfortably. The sound of the Ravens' bikes behind Duke grew louder, engines revving like thunder. Tank walked up beside him, calm but ready. "Boss, say the word." Duke lifted his hand slightly. "Not yet." He turned to Jada again. "You didn't steal, right?" She shook her head quickly, tears welling up. "No, sir, I paid. The rapper fell and he just grabbed me." Her voice cracked on the last word. That sound, small, breaking, hit Duke harder than any punch ever could. He looked at the officers one last time. "Take the cuffs off her, now." The older one hesitated. The crowd shifted closer, a dozen phones filming, the Ravens flanking their leader like an iron wall. Finally, the cuffs clicked open. Jada rubbed her wrists, the red marks stark against her skin. Duke crouched down slightly so his voice was level with hers. "You're safe now," he said quietly. She nodded, shaking, her voice barely audible. "Why'd you help me?" Duke glanced at the flashing police lights reflected in the puddles. "Because nobody helped my brother." But as the sirens faded and the officers retreated, Duke knew this wasn't over, because some battles don't end when the cuffs come off. They just change shape. The engines finally went silent miles outside town. The Ravens pulled off onto an empty stretch of road overlooking the hills, wind whipping through the grass. The confrontation was over, but the adrenaline hadn't faded. Jada sat on the back of Duke's bike, her hands trembling as she held the helmet he'd given her. She hadn't said a word since they left. The girl who had been crying against a police car now sat in stunned silence, staring at the road like she still couldn't believe she was free. Duke shut off the ignition and swung his leg over the seat. The sun was dipping low, painting the sky in deep golds and crimson.
He looked down at her, small, scared, but trying to be brave. "You hungry?"
he asked softly. She nodded hesitantly. Tank handed over a sandwich and a bottle of water from his saddlebag. Jada took them slowly, whispering, "Thank you." For a moment, the air was peaceful, just the sound of the wind and the low hum of cooling engines. But Duke's phone buzzed, breaking the calm. He looked at the screen. Local news alert. Biker leader confronts police in viral video. He exhaled sharply. "Well, guess the world's watching now," Tank chuckled dryly. "You just made half the internet think we're heroes and the other half think we're criminals." Duke didn't answer. He looked out at the fading sun. "Let them think what they want. I did what I had to." Jada looked up from her sandwich. "Are they going to come after you now?" He met her gaze, those big, fearful eyes. "Probably," he admitted. "But I've been running from worse things than cops." Tank leaned against his bike. "Boss, she can't go back home." You saw those bruises. Whoever hurt her will just pick up where the cops left off. Duke's jaw tightened. He already knew that. We'll take her somewhere safe, he said. I know someone. A shelter a few towns over. They help kids like her. Jada lowered her head. You don't even know me, she whispered. Duke crouched beside her. I don't have to. I just know what it's like when no one believes you. For the first time since they'd met, she smiled. Small, unsure, but real. Behind them, the sun sank into the horizon. The Ravens mounted their bikes again, engines growling back to life. As they rode off toward the shelter, Duke couldn't shake the feeling that something much bigger was coming, something that wouldn't be solved by kindness alone. Because somewhere back in town, that video wasn't just trending. It was making enemies. And one of them had already decided to find the man who made the cops look weak. By the time Duke and the Ravens reached the edge of Brenton County, night had settled deep. The roar of their engines faded into the distance, replaced by the soft chirp of crickets and the hum of neon lights from a rundown motel off the highway. They parked their bikes in a half circle, engines ticking as they cooled. Jada sat on the curb, legs tucked close, the flicker of a nearby street lamp glinting off the steel bracelet still faintly marking her wrist. Tank handed Duke a cigarette, but he didn't take it. He was staring at his phone again. The video had gone viral overnight. Millions of views. Dozens of headlines. Outlaw or hero? Biker leader confronts police in racial arrest. Who is Duke Maddox? He scrolled through comment after comment. Some praised him. Others called for his arrest. He sighed, running a calloused hand down his face. Tank tilted his head. Boss, you realize this ain't just noise now, right? You embarrassed 2 cops in front of the whole damn world. Duke nodded. I know. And people like them don't forgive embarrassment. Inside the motel, the TV was already replaying the footage. Grainy, but clear enough to see every detail. Duke's face. Jada's tears. The moment the cuffs came off. It wasn't just a story anymore. It was a symbol, but symbols have a way of drawing fire. A black SUV rolled to a stop 2 blocks away. Inside sat Captain Royce, head of Brenton County's Special Enforcement Division, a man whose badge was clean, but whose record wasn't. He'd watched the video 5 times already, his jaw clenching tighter with each replay. Find him, Royce ordered his partner coldly. And make sure that video stops spreading. Whatever it takes. Back at the motel, Jada dozed off on the couch, exhaustion finally catching up. Duke covered her with his leather jacket before stepping outside. He leaned against his bike, watching the road disappear into the dark. The air was heavy, thick with quiet dread. He'd made peace with being hunted years ago, but this time it wasn't just his life on the line. Tank joined him, lighting his cigarette. You think helping her was worth it? Duke didn't answer right away. His eyes stayed fixed on the horizon. Ask me again when she's safe, he said finally. A single headlight glowed far down the highway, too steady, too slow. Someone was watching, and as that lone headlight crept closer through the dark, Duke realized this wasn't just fallout, it was the start of a war he thought he'd left behind. The hum of the streetlights was the only sound as the lone headlight drew closer. Duke's instincts sharpened. That kind of slow crawl wasn't random. Whoever was behind the wheel wasn't lost. They were hunting. He moved his hand casually to the side of his bike, where his old revolver sat holstered. Tank noticed the shift immediately. We got company? Maybe, Duke muttered. The car slowed to a stop across the street. The windows were tinted black. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the driver's window rolled down just an inch, and a camera lens poked out, a flash. Then another, Tank cursed. Reporters? Not the kind that ask questions, Duke said quietly. The kind that send information. He watched as the car backed away and disappeared down the road. But something inside him twisted. That move was too clean, too familiar. It wasn't press. It was surveillance. Inside the motel, Jada stirred awake as a siren wailed faintly in the distance. Are they coming for me? She asked, eyes wide. Duke shook his head. No, kid. They're coming for me. She looked at him for a long moment, her voice soft. Then why don't you just run? He smiled faintly. Because I've been running my whole damn life. Time I stood still for someone else. Tank leaned in the doorway, exhaling smoke. Royce, maybe? Duke's jaw tightened. He was Brenton County before I left. Dirty even back then. I figured he'd have retired or rotted by now. Tank kicked at the gravel. Guess some ghosts don't stay buried. The rest of the Ravens settled in quietly. Nobody joked, nobody talked loud. Every man there had the same look, that heavy calm before the storm. Duke sat at the edge of the curb, staring at his reflection in a puddle. Older now, scarred, tired. But in his eyes, that same fire burned. He thought about his brother again, about how justice had turned its back when they needed it most. Jada sat beside him, wrapping his jacket tighter around her shoulders. "You think people like us ever stop fighting?" she asked softly. He looked up at the night sky. Endless, dark, but sprinkled with light. "Maybe not," he said. "But if we fight smart, sometimes we win long enough to change something." Then, from somewhere down the road, came the distant growl of engines. Not theirs this time. Louder, heavier, Tank looked up sharply. "Boss?" "That's not cops." Duke rose to his feet, every instinct screaming. "No," he said, eyes narrowing toward the horizon. "That's someone worse." And as those engines drew closer through the dark, Duke realized the past he'd buried wasn't chasing him anymore. It had found him. The sound of approaching engines split the quiet night wide open. Not the steady rhythm of the Ravens' Harleys. This was heavier, more chaotic, the sound of riders who didn't care what they crushed under their wheels. Tank's hand went straight to his sidearm. "Boss, that's the Iron Vultures!" Duke's stomach dropped. The name was a ghost, one he hadn't heard in almost 10 years. Headlights cut through the darkness as 7 bikes roared into the motel lot, circling like predators. The lead rider, a broad man with a jagged scar across his face, killed his engine and stared at Duke through his tinted visor. Then, slowly, he lifted it. Axel Briggs. Once a brother in Duke's old life, and now the reason his real brother was dead. "Well, well," Axel said, voice dripping with mock surprise. "If it ain't Duke Maddox. Heard you've been busy playing hero." The Ravens tightened their stance, forming a half circle behind Duke. The motel lights flickered, casting long shadows across the asphalt. Duke didn't move. "You still cleaning up after dirty cops, Axel?" Axel smirked. "I clean up for whoever pays. And right now, someone with a badge wants you off the map." Tank spat on the ground. "Royce sent you?" Axel grinned wider. "Guess even the law needs outlaws sometimes." Duke took a step forward. "You touched that girl, Axel, and I swear—" Axel cut him off with a laugh. "Relax, I ain't here for the kid. But I can't let you keep making the police look weak. That doesn't sit well with my employers, or me." The air went still. Behind Duke, Jada peeked from the motel doorway, clutching his jacket around her. Her eyes went from the glinting metal to the men's faces, and for a moment she saw something she'd never expected to. Fear. "Get her back inside," Duke said quietly without turning. Tank nodded and ushered her in. Axel tilted his head. "She the reason you're breaking all your rules, Duke? The reason you've got the world's cameras pointed your way? Someone had to do something," Duke said. Axel's grin faded.
You always were the righteous one.
"Always thinking you could save everyone. How'd that work out for your brother?" The words hit like a gunshot. For a heartbeat, Duke didn't breathe. Then, slowly, he stepped closer. "You just made your last mistake," he said quietly. Axel's hand went to his weapon, and that was all it took. The Ravens drew. The vultures revved. The night exploded into chaos. And as the first gunshot split the silence, Duke knew this fight wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about redemption. The motel lights buzzed like hornets above the chaos. Then, the crack of gunfire. The first shot shattered a car window, spraying glass across the asphalt. The Ravens dove for cover behind their bikes, returning fire in short, sharp bursts. The smell of gasoline and smoke mixed with the desert air. Tank shouted, "They're flanking left!" "Hold the line!" Duke barked back, his voice a low growl over the roar of engines. He moved with precision, every motion deliberate, every glance aware. This wasn't just a fight. It was war coming home. Axel's crew fanned out, their laughter echoing through the night like wolves scenting blood. The motel's neon sign flickered behind them. casting red and blue light over chaos, a twisted reflection of police sirens that weren't even there yet. Inside the motel room, Jada crouched beneath the window, covering her ears. Every crack of gunfire made her flinch. Mrs. Ramirez, the old motel clerk, had locked the back door and was whispering prayers in Spanish. Outside, Duke spotted Axel moving between cars, his silhouette unmistakable. He fired once, missing by inches. Axel ducked and fired back, the bullet grazing Duke's shoulder. He winced but didn't stop. Tank called out, "You hit?" "Just a scratch," Duke muttered, pressing a gloved hand to the wound. Blood seeped through, warm and sticky. He'd had worse. Two of the Ravens, Wally and Briggs, roared their engines, using the bikes as moving cover, tires spitting gravel. The Vultures answered with fire, one bullet striking a gas pump. The explosion rocked the lot. Flames erupted, painting the night in violent orange. The motel sign shattered, sparks raining down like dying stars. Through the smoke, Axel shouted, "You can't win this, Duke." "You never could." Duke rose slowly from behind his bike, the flames reflecting in his eyes. "Maybe not," he said, "but I don't lose twice." He stepped forward, bullets flying past, each step heavier, purposeful. He wasn't fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for the girl inside, for the brother he lost, for the piece of his soul that had been bleeding for years. When the smoke cleared, the Vultures retreated, tires screeching, engines howling as they fled into the dark. Axel's bike wobbled from the impact of a shot Duke had fired, sparks flying from his rear wheel as he disappeared into the night. Silence fell, broken only by the crackle of fire and the hiss of cooling engines. Tank ran up, panting. "They're gone, boss." Duke didn't answer. He just stared after the road where Axel vanished. Not for long, because Duke knew men like Axel, and the ones who sent him, never stopped at one fight. The war had just begun. By dawn, the motel lot looked like a war zone. Smoke drifted lazily into a pale sky, curling around the burned-out shell of a gas pump. The air reeked of gasoline and ash. The Ravens stood scattered, battered but alive. Duke sat on the curb, his jacket torn, shoulder bleeding through the fabric. The fire trucks had already come and gone. Now the sirens that echoed down the highway belonged to something else, law enforcement. Tank kicked at a shell casing near his boot. "We got maybe 5 minutes before this turns ugly." Duke looked toward the motel. Through the cracked window, he could see Jada sitting on the bed, knees pulled to her chest, exhaustion in her every breath. He'd promised her safety, and once again, the world had brought her chaos. The squad cars arrived fast. Blue and red lights painted the smoke like a warning. Captain Royce stepped out first, pristine uniform, polished shoes, a man who'd never dirtied his hands but had plenty of blood on them. "Well," Royce said, smiling like he'd rehearsed it, "you sure know how to put on a show, Maddox." Duke rose slowly, wincing but steady. "Guess your hired guns couldn't finish the job." Royce's smirk faltered. "You're making wild claims, son. Then you won't mind if I tell every reporter that your friends from the Iron Vultures just tried to kill a teenage girl under your watch." The air went cold. Even Tank stopped breathing. Royce's eyes narrowed to slits. "Careful, Duke. You've already made yourself a folk hero. Would be a shame if that fame turned into a manhunt." He turned to his officers. "Arrest them for unlawful discharge of firearms, destruction of property, and obstruction." Duke stepped closer, eyes blazing. "You put a hand on my men and I'll—" Tank grabbed his arm. "Boss," he muttered. "Not here. Not now." Jada burst through the door then, her voice shaking but fierce. "They didn't do anything." "Wrong! Those other men attacked first!" Royce turned toward her with thinly veiled annoyance. "Sweetheart, I think you've been through a lot. Let the adults handle this." She stepped closer. "The adults are the problem." The crowd of bystanders that had gathered began whispering. Phones lifted again. Royce noticed, and for the first time, uncertainty flashed across his face. He forced a smirk. "Fine. Enjoy your 15 minutes, Maddox, but this isn't over." As the police retreated to their cars, Tank exhaled. We just made the evening news again. Duke watched Royce drive off, his gut tightening. Yeah, he said quietly. But this time we'll control the story. Because Duke wasn't just fighting for one girl anymore. He was fighting for every voice the world had tried to silence. And the louder they got, the more dangerous the truth became. Night fell fast over the back roads of Brenton County. The Ravens rode hard, engines humming like distant thunder as the highway stretched into nothing but pine trees and mist. They had no map, no plan, just a destination burned into Duke's memory. Red Hollow, an abandoned mechanic's yard deep in the woods. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. Old steel sheds, rusted tools, and a single generator that coughed to life after 3 tries. Not exactly 5-star, Tank muttered as they parked. Duke looked around. Good. The best places don't show up on GPS. Jada climbed off the bike slowly, her eyes darting around the dark yard. Where are we? Safe, Duke said simply. For now. He handed her a blanket and led her inside the largest shed, now half turned into a makeshift clubhouse. A faded sofa, scattered motorcycle parts, and a wall covered with photos from another life. His brother was in one of them, smiling beside a younger Duke before everything went wrong. Jada followed his gaze. That your brother? Yeah, Duke said softly. He believed in fixing things, even people. Guess I took longer to learn that part. Tank entered carrying an old radio. Boss, I picked up chatter from town. Royce's people are spinning the shootout. They're saying we ambushed police informants. Duke's jaw tightened. So now we're outlaws again. You ever stopped being one? Tank asked with a smirk. Duke didn't answer, just stared at the flickering light bulb above them. The only difference between an outlaw and a liar is which side of the badge you're standing on. Jada shifted uneasily. They're really gonna come after you, huh? Not if I go after them first, Duke said. Tank frowned. You sure that's the move? Royce has connections. Politicians, news outlets, hell, maybe even the feds. Duke turned, his expression hard. Doesn't matter. The only thing that scares men like Royce is sunlight. We put the truth out there, loud and clear. Tank hesitated. And what about the vultures? Axel's still out there. He won't sit still after last night. I'm counting on that, Duke said, checking his gun. Let him come. I'm done running. Jada looked between them, fear flickering behind her tired eyes. I don't want anyone else getting hurt because of me. Duke crouched beside her. You didn't start this fight, kid, he said gently. But you might be the reason it finally ends. Outside, a raven posted on lookout shouted from the gate. Boss, bike lights, heading this way. Duke stood, adrenaline already surging. Get her inside, he ordered. Tank grabbed his rifle. Think it's Axel? Duke's eyes narrowed at the growing glow on the horizon. No, he said quietly. Royce got here first, and as red and blue lights spilled through the trees, Duke realized this time there would be no running, no cameras, no mercy. Just truth and bullets. The woods were alive with flashing lights. Red, blue, white. Sirens cut through the cold night air, echoing against the trees like war drums. The ravens formed a defensive circle around the yard, headlights blazing through the fog. Duke stood at the front gate, his leather jacket streaked with dirt and dried blood. His gun hung heavy at his side. Across the clearing, police cruisers rolled in slow and deliberate, and behind them, the black SUV. Captain Royce stepped out first, a smirk carved into his face. End of the road, Maddox, he called. You've had your 15 minutes of fame. Now it's time to pay up. But before Duke could answer, another sound ripped through the night, the low, growling thunder of motorcycles. Everyone turned. As Axel Briggs and the Iron Vultures emerged from the tree line, their bikes kicking up gravel. They weren't here for negotiation. They were here to finish what they'd started. Royce's smirk faded. What the hell is this? Duke chuckled darkly. You wanted to clean up the mess, Captain? Well, looks like it came to your doorstep. Axel dismounted, his boots crunching against the dirt. You made me bleed, Duke, he growled. "Now I'm here to return the favor." The tension was electric. Police weapons drew. Biker guns lifted. For a single heartbeat, time held its breath. Then chaos erupted. Gunfire cracked like lightning. Sparks flew as bullets tore into metal and wood. The Ravens ducked for cover behind bikes and crates, firing back with precision. The air was thick with smoke and grit, the world reduced to flashes of muzzle fire and the thunder of engines revving in panic. Tank yelled, "They're surrounding the left flank!" "Hold them!" Duke shouted, reloading fast. From the shadows, Jada darted behind the workbench, her hands shaking. She found an old wrench, the only weapon she could hold, and stayed low. Her heart pounded like a drum. Through the smoke, Duke spotted Royce trying to retreat toward his SUV, barking orders into his radio. He fired once, clipping the radio from Royce's hand. "No more running, Captain," he shouted. Axel charged from behind a burning car, gun raised. Duke turned just in time. The two men collided hard, crashing into the gravel. Fists flew, metal clanged, the world narrowing to pain and fury. "You killed my brother!" Duke roared, slamming Axel against a post. Axel spat blood. "He was collateral!" Duke's fist came down like judgment. When it lifted again, Axel didn't move. Silence fell. Just the crackle of fire and the faint hum of dying sirens. Royce stood frozen, gun raised, but his hand shook. "Go ahead," Duke said quietly. "Finish your lie." Royce hesitated. Then, he dropped the gun. By the time dawn broke, it was over. The police had no story left to twist. Too many witnesses, too many cameras, too much truth. Jada stood beside Duke as the sun rose through the smoke. "What happens now?" she asked softly. Duke looked out toward the horizon, his voice rough but calm. "Now," he said, "we ride, and make sure this never happens again." The engine started one last time, echoing like a promise through the quiet morning. And as the Ravens disappeared into the rising sun, the world finally understood. Sometimes justice doesn't come in a badge or a courtroom. Sometimes it comes roaring in on two wheels, carrying the kind of men who refuse to look away.